Welcome back to As You Pass By. I'm James West. We're going to visit today the former theater district of Manhattan, which was located around Union Square starting in about 1860 as the theater district moved north and began to populate the area around Union Square. Some on Irving Place, some on 3rd Avenue, and one or two down Broadway. There were several, there were about 12 to 15 theaters at the height of the era of the theater district. And at its center was the Academy of Music, which was an opera house on 14th Street in Irving Place, which hasn't been there for many years. It was replaced by the Con Edison building. But around it were many theaters, dining places, shopping. It was quite a fashionable neighborhood back in, probably at its height was around 1890 to 1900. Some of these were theaters, opera houses that were never used for movies. And some of them were Nickelodeons, some of them were vaudeville or burlesque. And most of them did at some point later in after about 1910 or 1915 began showing movies. But prior to that, primary type of entertainment was theater, live productions, and not movies. So I hope you enjoy. We're going to visit a couple of areas today, and this is part one of the Theater District episode. So, subscribe to my channel and like the video, and also comment in the comment section below. So enjoy, and we'll meet you up on Union Square. We're over here at the corner of Avenue A and 14th Street, looking north. Avenue A sort of comes to an end here because this is where Stuyvesant Town begins. But right over across the street, and you may remember this from an earlier episode, there was a theater here called the Mecca Theater, which was built in 1927 on the site of the, if I can remember this, the Royal East Side Beauty Theater, which was built in 1908 and demolished in 1927. And then the Mecca was built on the spot in 1927 and torn down in 1943. The theater held nearly 2,000 people. It was the capacity was 1,947 seats, and this was sort of the eastern edge of the Union Square Theater District. We're here at 241 East 14th Street, and this was the site of a theater that opened in 1914, and it was called the New 14th Street Theater. It had a capacity of about 1,500. It changed its name a couple times. In the 1940s, this became the Arrow Theater, and it remained that until about 1966, when it was converted to an adult theater known as the Metropolitan. It survived until about 1988, when it was torn down. And from what I'm reading, the owners never either cleaned or upgraded the interior, and it had never been painted either. So it had some of the original decorations when it was finally torn down in 1988. By the way, the weather, it just couldn't be any worse today. Pouring rain, and it's been pouring for days now. Now we're just a few feet down the block at 225 East 14th Street. We were just over there at 241, where you see the IHOP, which I thought had changed its name, but apparently it hasn't. Anyway, so this was also called the Metropolitan Theater for some reason. I don't know why. And there's almost nothing written about it. There are two stores that both have the address of 225 East 14th Street. This was a small gay porn theater that I've been able to find out almost nothing about, other than that it did exist. I don't know when. The building is probably dates from the 1890s, And I believe it was gone by the mid 70s, early 70s. This area had become sort of an adult theater district, a small one. We're right across 3rd Avenue from 136 3rd Avenue, which, as you can see, the entire block has been raised. It's really just a parking lot for the higher-ups at Con Edison. But it used to be a movie theater. It was called the Star Theater. It was built in 1914, and it only lasted until about 1944. There's very little information about this place. It was one of the smaller of the Union Square theaters. It had a capacity of about 300, and it only existed for a few decades. There are a few photographs, but there's, like I said, there's very little information about who owned it and what kind of theater it was. A lot of the theaters around here were Nickelodeons and also vaudeville. Some were opera houses and doubled as movie theaters later on as movies became more popular. We're across the street from the location at 110 3rd Avenue between 14th and 13th Street, which was the Variety photo plays made famous in the Martin Scorsese movie Taxi Driver in 1975, I think. Anyway, the theater was built in 1914. There's nothing left of it. There's this ugly, well, in my opinion, ugly glass building here now. It was opened as a Nickelodeon, which wasn't really necessarily a movie theater, but it sort of was the precursor to movie theaters, where you could either pay a nickel to get in, or some of the machines cost a nickel to operate, and you would just watch a short movie, silent, from that machine. Anyway, it was finally torn down in 2000. The Variety photo plays was torn down in 2005, and before that it had been used also as an adult film movie theater. Also there were off-Broadway productions here, first-run movies. It went through a number of cycles from its, during its lifespan of about 60 years from 1914. We are right across the street from the location of the Tony Pastor's Theater, which was in the same building that Tammany Hall was occupied. Anyway, this was opened in 1868, right after the Civil War, when a number of theaters were open at that time. This stood right next door to where the Con Edison, this is the Con Edison building. Let me come out of the rain a little bit. And it was right next door to what used to be here was the Academy of Music, which was the opera house that was sort of the center of the entertainment activity on 14th Street. And it really was, it was a huge theater. It was 4,000 seats, and of course it was only gas lit, but it existed here until the construction of the Metropolitan Opera House in the 90s. And Tony Pastor's Theater would have been right next door here. Everything was torn down in the 1920s to make way for the Con Edison building. But the Academy of Music had sort of ceased operating way before that. So right across the street here was the site of the second Academy of Music. The first one would have been right over here on the corner. This is the Con Ed building that we were talking about before, built in 1927. And so the Academy of Music was torn down prior to that, and the new Academy of Music was built here. and it was opened in 1928, and it had a very large capacity of 4,000. So it was probably the largest theater in the Union Square area. It was mostly known as a movie theater. Later on, it became sort of a rock concert venue, and it continued to be called the Academy of Music. And then a little bit later in the 70s, it became the Palladium, which was then converted to sort of a private party event, club, disco, and that closed in the early 2000s to make way for the Land NYU dormitory. So we're right across from what would have been 141 East 14th Street. It's listed as 141, but honestly, I don't think it was, because that was the south side of the street, which only has even numbers. So this was where the City Theater existed. Built in 1904, one of the earlier movie theaters of this area, now replaced by these NYU buildings, which are, that's where the Academy of Music was. So now there are these three. Anyway, I won't get into that, but the City Theater was sort of, it had a makeover into a sort of Art Deco style in the 1930s. It existed here until 1956, and it was had a capacity of 1,855 seats. So we're here on the northwest corner of 15th Street and Irving Place, and this is Irving Plaza, and it is the only venue that still exists from the Union Square Theater District or Movie District. It's still in operation. It's a concert venue right now, and you can see some of the bands unloading their bus and truck. But this was built in 1888, and it survived pretty much continuously, although it changed identities. A number of the theaters around here, especially after the Second World War, showed Russian language movies, and also it featured French movies. It was originally built to sort of accommodate the German community that was south of here in the East Village in the 1880s. But it's the sole surviving structure of from the old days.